Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology Podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, as always, here with my good friend Graham Doran. We are both wearing collared shirts. We're a month away from Selection Sunday and we are getting pumped. Going to start out talking about what our biggest takeaways are from the top 16 reveal. Won't focus too much on it because I remember one year when we were doing the mock committee with Joe Lenardi, he like hopped on and I was saying something like, yeah, well, you know what the committee did a couple weeks ago, and Joe was like, they probably don't even know why they did what they did a couple of weeks ago, so maybe we shouldn't focus too much on it. But big takeaways, I'll give my first one, then you can jump in with one. My biggest one is that selection committee chair Charles McClelland says metrics the way most of us say matrix, and that threw me for a loop about 10 times when he said it. I thought he was talking about the bracket matrix. He's like, when you look at the matrix, I'm not trying to make fun of his accent, but the matrix is a key thing that we look at in bracketology. But
I'm not going to lie, Kerry. I'm literally just now, I did not realize that's what happened. I actually thought they had different matrices put together by like interns or something like that.
He definitely just says metrics with like a Louisiana accent of some sort.
And this makes way more sense because I had never heard of them talk about a bracketing matrix before. Yeah, now I'm confused.
Now it's fit because it jumped out to both of us so many times that he said, clearly they're looking at the matrix, however they pronounce it. But yeah,
that makes so much sense.
That threw me for a loop for the first 10 minutes. I was like, are they talking about looking at the bracket matrix? Like,
well, it threw me a loop for the first 36 hours because I really genuinely thought they were doing some sort of comparison.
He was definitely saying, like, when you look at Arizona's matrix, he was saying metrics. And
man, I was really wanting to get a hold of that matrix.
All right, what was your biggest takeaway? I'm sure your biggest is.
I think I had a couple big takeaways. I think the number one takeaway that I had was San Diego State was where they were. I wasn't surprised to see their name called. I was surprised to see them at 14.
Yeah.
That made me believe that the committee feels maybe two different things. One, they're impressed with the Mountain West, because I don't think San Diego State's that high unless they're impressed with the Mountain West.
Yeah.
The other thing that it makes me believe is maybe there's a little carryover momentum from last year, where maybe the committee's thinking, well, some of these teams that were strong the previous year, maybe they're going to do it again. And I think we saw that with last year. Miami, I thought, got a little bit of a seed bump. I actually had them on the 5 line. That's where they ended up. But I think a lot of people didn't. But I was thinking, man, this team's coming off an Elite Eight. They're the ACC regular season champions. You're really going to have them as a 6 seed? I think maybe there's something to be said for prioritizing potential conference champions like San Diego State, and also these teams that have kind of built their reputations over time. I think when it got down to some of these seed line discussions of who just stays on one seed line versus the other, some of those name brands carried those 8, 12 positions just above some other teams.
Yeah. One thing on San Diego State, I looked this up today because we are talking nonstop about Connecticut's going to repeat. San Diego State could get there too. We have not had a repeat championship matchup since Cincinnati, Ohio State, 1961, 1962. Just throwing that out there. I'm not that shocked that San Diego State landed where they are because I did not think they would make it because historically the Mountain West does kind of get underseeded. And San Diego State did get a 2 in 2011. They were probably going to get a 1 in 2020, either them or Dayton. The other one was going to be 5 overall. But historically, the Mountain West is a little undervalued because until last year they always failed in the tournament. But they were, even before the Friday night game, the win over New Mexico, they were 5-6 against the top 50. Not necessarily quadrants. We're going back to pre-quadrants, just versus top 50. But all 6 of their losses were true road games against top 10 seeds in my estimation. So they hadn't done anything bad, and maybe that elevated them above certainly Illinois, which is 0-4 against Quad 1A, over Wisconsin, who can't beat anybody lately, over Dayton, who doesn't have any wins over the projected field, that kind of thing. So I'm not shocked. Maybe there was a little element of we're sick of hearing that we don't pay attention to Thursday and Friday, and we're going to make this Friday game matter a lot. They didn't seem to make the Tuesday games matter, though. That was my other big takeaway, is North Carolina at 5 overall. I don't know what that was about. If they counted the Syracuse game, like you speculated, maybe they were using Tuesday morning KPI SOR numbers and didn't update their matrix to reflect that terrible loss, their worst of the season. I don't know if it was, North Carolina AD Bubba Cunningham is just the big man in the room there, and not that he intimidated them or anything, but maybe his voice plays a lot. But I think it was just they went with the 6 projected Power 6 champions. And when it came down to North Carolina and Tennessee at 5 and 6, they had that head-to-head win. I don't know if they do that with the top 16, if they're just assuming that whoever would be the auto bids right now should be the auto, like they would be the, sweep champions or whatever, which does historically make a difference. If Arizona wins the regular season and conference tournament championship, that's going to probably keep them ahead of, say, if Kansas finishes second in the Big 12 and finishes runner-up in the Big 12 tournament. But I'm wondering how much that played into it. But I also think they just didn't count the Syracuse game.
Yeah, I think one thing that it could be is, as you mentioned, my personal speculation is they did count the Syracuse game in their minds.
Yeah.
They put it together after that game had happened. But it's not unlike any other business or organization or anything. Data is from when you scrape the data. Then honestly, they just may not have scraped the data yet when they put together their team sheets in the morning. It could simply be, hey, we've got updated net. Oh, we didn't realize the KPI and the strength of record hadn't been updated on our team sheets yet. It could actually be that simple of an explanation.
I do that half the time. I pull the numbers from Bart Torvik, and then I check later, and KPI updates later in the day than anything else. It could just be that. That's why I don't, during selection week, I pull my data Thursday morning, and then I don't update it again. I'll reflect for wins and whatnot, but I don't change the, KPI SOR, KenPom, none of that. I just leave it big.
Same. And what I think could have happened here, if my theory has any merit, which to be honest, I don't know that it does. This is pure speculation on my part. And the only reason I'm even thinking about this is because UNC at 5 was that mystifying to me.
Yeah.
It only makes sense in my head if you're looking at KPI 4, strength of record 5, 4.5 resume metric average, yeah, they lost to Syracuse, but look at that KPI, look at those strength of record. This is a great team. That makes a ton of sense then to me. And if you actually break it down that way, the order of resume metric average on that Wednesday morning, if they hadn't scraped yet, would have been North Carolina, followed by, Tennessee, followed by Kansas, followed by Marquette. The issue with Kansas and Marquette is they played on a neutral floor, and Marquette won that game. So I think it could have been as simple as, hey, they're right next to each other in the seed list. We have a neutral court win. Put Marquette over them.
Yeah.
Then following them, it was Alabama, Baylor, Iowa State in order.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
They were all in order except for that one head-to-head game.
That was my other big takeaway is KPI SOR reigns supreme. Top 4 KPI SOR average on, I think I pulled it on Saturday morning and looked at it, but even before that, it was the 4 number 1 seeds. 5 through 8 KPI SOR were the 4 2 seeds. Of the 16 teams, they were all top 19 in KPI SOR. The 3 exceptions were Dayton, who, again, does not have a win over the projected field, unless you have Cincinnati in, so maybe a win over a bubble team. Clemson, who is around 25 in the net, and I forget what my justification was. Well, they had them among the 3 that they considered, but they were 25 in the net, around 25 in the predictives, and then South Carolina, who's 50 in the net, and they probably just agreed, we're not even going to go down that road right now after a 40-point loss to Auburn. So I think KPI SOR, if you're going to look at any of the matrix, it's KPI SOR, which we've been saying for, 11, 12, 13 consecutive episodes here.
And for Clemson, the one thing that stood out for me, I personally believe they deserve that 16th spot. I think they deserved it because they beat UNC and Alabama on neutral, or not neutral courts, and true road courts games. So I believe that personally. But if I were to look at it from a different perspective, I could easily see where somebody says, net indicates this is a 6 seed, predictives indicate this is a 6 seed, strength of record indicates this is a 6 seed. Yes, they've got a fantastic KPI. Yes, they've got 2 really great road wins. So we're going to consider them for the 4 seed because we think they deserve that bump up, just not so much to actually get onto that line. But I think in their heads, it makes total sense that they actually really did respect those road wins by bumping them up to even consider them for a 4 seed.
Now, they always have said 4 teams that they consider, don't they? They usually give you, they don't rank the 5 seeds, but they'll have 4. They only said 3.
I've never heard that before.
I'm wondering if it was South Carolina and they didn't want to point out that they considered a team that's 50th in the net, or if it's BYU and they didn't want to point out that they weren't including the 9th team in the net. I don't know, but it was really weird that they only said 3.
And the fact that nobody on the studio team said something about it, was like, hey, was there a 4th team? Because the NCAA, they're all about their policies and procedures.
Right. Rank 8, seed 8.
They voted on 4 teams. It's always sets of 4s. There was definitely another team included. Why they weren't mentioned is really interesting. Perhaps it's just a human oversight, and honestly, that's probably what the explanation is. He probably just didn't think to say the other team. But that was really interesting, because even if he didn't think to say the other team, it probably indicates they weren't that close.
Yeah.
Because they were probably not a part of the real heart of that discussion.
Yeah. So is there any part of the reveal that is going to change the way you do anything the rest of this season? Because for me, no. I had South Carolina in the 16. I didn't think that they deserved to be in the 16. I just assumed that was entirely based on an assumption that they weren't going to include Wednesday data. Beyond that, I probably would have had San Diego State as my 16th team at that point.
For me, it's San Diego State. That's the only takeaway I'm really going to walk away with, which is I didn't think San Diego State, and we're talking 3 different seed lines, right? Overall seed lines. I had them 17th. They were 14th.
Yeah.
This is not a huge difference. But to me, the way I look at these teams, that is actually a kind of big difference for what I was considering.
For them to be ahead of both Wisconsin and Illinois.
For them to be ahead of both Wisconsin and Illinois was surprising to me. I did not expect either of those. So that, to me, is just kind of one of those mental notes. Hey, if they really thought they were better than those 2 at that time, I should remember the committee likes San Diego State.
If they continue to win, I think they're going to get a 2 seed. They have enough of a solid schedule remaining. I think they have a road game against Utah State coming up in a day or 2, and then home games against 2 of the other 4 Mountain West teams still in the mix for at-large bids. They could play their way up. If they were 14, they're probably already 13 because Auburn lost pretty convincingly to Kentucky. I think they could get up to it too. So let's talk Purdue UConn. Got a bit of a debate now that when McClellan said that it was unanimous for the top 4. It was all 12 of them had Purdue at 1, Connecticut at 2, Houston at 3, Arizona at 4, which I thought was interesting. I thought there would at least be somewhat of a UConn-Houston debate. And now that we know that Connecticut was unanimously ahead of Houston, I feel like the committee's a little higher on UConn than I originally thought. Then they went out and destroyed Marquette, and Purdue lost to Ohio State today. Did you switch them at 1 and 2? I switched them about 15 times and ended up still with Purdue at 1 overall. I think it's very, very close.
I switched them. I have UConn number 1 overall. I will say I was not surprised to hear that it was unanimous for Purdue over UConn and unanimous for UConn over Houston. I felt pretty clearly that was going to be the order in my mind, just because Purdue had an unbelievable resume. UConn had a really, really fantastic resume, but it couldn't compete with the overall quality of Purdue's.
Yep.
And Houston just didn't quite have the resume of UConn. And what are you going to say? UConn's not good enough?
Yeah.
I don't care what the predictors say. If UConn has a better resume than Houston, they're going to be ahead. I think for me that order was pretty clear. But I also felt like even though the order was clear, they were still all somewhat tightly bunched. So for me, I thought Purdue probably needed to lose twice or take 1 bad loss. And I would say this wasn't a great loss, not a terrible loss. But what really changed things was the way UConn beat Marquette. I think if UConn had beat Marquette the way that I thought they were going to, 7-8 point win, then I think I would not have probably switched them. But the fact that they beat them that way, there's a certain point where you say, the resume no longer matters. It's about how I feel about a team like this. And let's be clear. UConn has a 9-2 Quadrant 1 record. Purdue is 9-3. So if you look at that, UConn has less losses than Purdue. They have a higher win percentage against Quadrant 1. That's not the full story. I still think Purdue has much higher quality wins than UConn does.
That's what it is for me.
But
because Purdue has those neutral wins over. Let's see, it was for the committee number 4 overall Arizona, number 6 overall Tennessee, number 7 overall Marquette, number 9 overall Alabama. I feel like they were enough convincingly ahead, but again, it's very close. If Connecticut wins at Creighton Tuesday night, I'm absolutely going to have Connecticut ahead of Purdue then, but there's still some time for it to change. It doesn't change anything about the bracket outside of where we're allowed to put the number 5 overall seed.
To me, it kind of reminds me a bit of 2012. And that was the year that Kentucky was the overall number 1 seed. And Syracuse had an unbelievably good resume. Syracuse was coming out of the Big East, lost 2 games that year.
Was that the year Syracuse started out 25-0?
Yeah.
They were in the ACC then. I don't know.
No, 2012.
No,
the 2012 team was in the Big East.
Yeah, but the 25-0 team was in the ACC. I remember because I think their first loss was to like Miami or Boston College.
Syracuse loses 2 games that year out of a very, very tough Big East. The SEC was not nearly as good as the Big East was. But the committee looked at it and said, I'm telling you right now, that Kentucky team's just better. I think that's what they would do with this UConn-Purdue situation. Be like, the resumes are close enough that we're going to go with the team that we just think is the best team.
Yeah, and again, I went back and forth again, just settled on Purdue, kind of under the notion of it'll figure itself out in a week or 2.
I mean, what have we been saying all year long? We have not really deviated from
what you've been saying all year long. Is Purdue was a lock at 1 overall.
But what we've been saying is UConn's that's the favorite to win the national championship.
Yep.
They are. Like, I don't care what else happens. They're going to be my pick until proven wrong, and it's just never happened. Like, UConn has always, at least to me, looked like the national championship favorite.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so what happened this weekend? Who did the most to help themselves? Who did the most to hurt themselves? We can go back and forth. You can do all of your biggest help teams, and I'll pitch in some that you may have missed.
I think a team that's really helped themselves is Florida.
Okay.
They've gone from a team that I felt was kind of like hoping to get on the 7 line, but I had as an 8 seed, to all of a sudden they're a 6 seed, potentially knocking on the door of a 5 seed. Yeah. So I'd say Florida's the team that's really helped themselves.
I have Florida at 21 overall now, and it shocked me that I had them there this morning.
Another team that I actually think really helped themselves, despite not making much of a seed dent, I think Kansas picking up a true road win over a tournament team. Finally, that was the thing. That was the holdup for Kansas's resume the whole year, is they don't have a true road win over a tournament level team. Now they've got one. Is it an elite win, a strong win? I'm not sure. It's probably somewhere between those, but it's a very good road win.
Yeah.
And I think that really shores up the hole in their resume. Not that it's, going to disappear. It's still a weakness, but that was like a big point that the committee could pick apart, and they still had them 8th overall, even despite those road struggles. So now that they've got this extra Q1A win, we're talking towards the top of the 2 line as opposed to the bottom of the 2 line, in my opinion.
And I feel the same way about Kentucky getting that massive win at Auburn. If they had lost that game, Kentucky was probably going to be top of the 8 seed line, somewhere in that range. And now I have them at 20 overall. They're now my bottom 5, and I can see them certainly climbing even higher than that. Not only was it a fantastic resume win, they just looked like the Kentucky we've been waiting on. I mean, they shut down Ole Miss earlier in the week. I think they gave up like 63 in a 72 possession game. Auburn scores 59 in a 67 possession game, something like that. Just finally playing that defense that Calipari teams you're used to seeing. Like it's been so weird all year long that Kentucky is this 3-point shooting juggernaut that doesn't play defense. Like who the hell is this? Now they look more like their usual selves, and that's scary because we already felt like Kentucky was one of the 5 most legitimate contenders to win it all.
Yeah, I'd been having Kentucky higher than most bracketologists for most of the year because we've talked about this, I just thought they looked the part and the committee was going to give them a break. And then what do? They turn around and lose home games to Florida and Gonzaga. And it's like, guys, I've been sticking up for you all year, and now you lose these 2 home games in a row to teams that both looked like bubble teams at the time.
Teams that would not be in the field.
Yeah, those were the games that bumped them up into the field. So I really I just felt like I'd reached this point where I'm like, okay, I can't keep giving Kentucky this bump. And then they do this, and I'm like, I'm right back on the train again, back up to a 5 seed for Kentucky.
Just when I think I'm out, they pull me. The other team that really helped themselves, South Florida today, beat Florida Atlantic, almost blew a 25-point second half lead. That was a crazy finish, but not only are they now, well, they already were the projected AAC auto bid. You probably still have Florida Atlantic, so you don't.
I do.
So we're going to have one difference on our bubble eventually, but they're actually in the bubble mix now. I mean, when I had them as my auto bid a week ago, they were like 54, 55 on the overall seed list. Now they're right up there with like Indiana State, McNeese State, like at 47, 48, 49. If they keep winning, they might pull it off.
Yeah, I think for me, I did look into where would I have them if I have them in the field. I still think I'd have them as a 13 seed at this point, but a strong 13 seed. I think what ultimately is holding me back from South Florida is just the resume's not there.
Oh yeah, they have 2 quad 4 losses. Like they're not very strong. If I didn't have them automatically in, they wouldn't be within my first 5 out. But they're getting there. They're at least on the board now.
I think their overall record is so strong, and their record in the AAC is so strong that it's going to come down to what does the committee feel about the AAC. If the committee feels that the AAC is a better league than most of the leagues in the country, and winning that title is worthy of respect, I could see them taking a flyer and saying, you know what, they ran away with that title. We should put this team in the field. But the resume is not going to be good enough to get them there. Yeah. It's going to be because they value the AAC that much.
There could also be a factor of, first-year coach there. I mean, Abdul Rahim, taking over a program, took them a little bit, had some transfers, all that stuff, and now they finally put it together. I know last 12 isn't a thing anymore on the team sheets or whatever, but that's one case where it could come in which they do. They definitively look better now than they did in November, December. I have a long list of teams that hurt themselves this weekend, which is kind of how it feels like we're going. But who's at the top of your list? Who did the most damage to them?
Oh boy, South Carolina. I had them as a 4 seed last week. You had them as a 4 seed last week. And could things have possibly gone any worse? I mean, they lose by 40, not 4, to Auburn. Then they lose at home to LSU.
Which was a 1-point game, but worse.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how much you lose when you lose at home to LSU. That's not an indictment of LSU. It's just saying, if you want to be a team that wants to be towards the top of the bracket, you cannot lose those sorts of games. Yeah. And you especially can't do it coming off a 40-point loss. So I dropped South Carolina to an 8 seed, and frankly...
Wow. Ooh. I still have them as a 6, but I don't feel good about it.
I think it was kind of back to that Kentucky situation. I'm usually pretty generous when, okay, it's one game. 40-point loss to Auburn. Terrible, but it's one game. Then you lose at home to LSU, and I'm like, okay, let's do a total reevaluation of this team. And those predictives are so bad. They remind me a lot of 2021 Missouri, who got a 9 seed. Missouri that year was a 21.5 resume with a 50.7 predictive. South Carolina right now is a 19.5 resume with a 60.7 predictive.
I'm aware.
So, I mean, tell me those teams don't line up very, very similarly. So I'm almost at the point where I'm like, I don't even know if an 8 seed is right. Maybe I need to be considering whether they should drop down to a 9 seed because their predictives are that bad. Yeah. Iowa State got hammered for bad predictives a couple years ago in 2022 also, despite having 9 quadrant 1 wins.
I remember that. I think I had them as a 4 and they got a 6 or something like that. That was one of the only teams I was off by 2 seed lines on.
Once we get further down the bracket, predictives tend to matter a little bit more. The committee starts to seed a little bit more harshly. If you're closer to that protected seed range, they're generally a little bit more generous to those teams.
I had made that South Carolina-Missouri connection before, but I don't know why I wasn't willing to hammer them that much yet. I still feel like, so they have 5 moderately difficult games remaining. They have a home game against Tennessee, I want to say a home game against Florida, and then road games against Mississippi State, and Texas A&M, something like that. They're all 5 tournament teams. they plausibly could lose all 5 games, and I feel like they're going to drop 1 seed line for each of those losses. But I feel like even if they lose all those, they'll still be close. I don't know. They definitely hurt themselves, no question about that. BYU for me, I think was the big one, losing by 10 at Oklahoma State. I think we're starting to get some serious questions about the Cougars. Metrics still look great. They're still 10th in the net, which is what we were talking about a month and a half ago. But they have, a home win over San Diego State in non-conference play, home win over Texas, I think, and Iowa State. They beat Iowa State at home, and so they have 3 home wins, and that's really it. I don't know. I'm not on the bubble with them yet. I still think they are a 7 seed, but for them to not even been mentioned as a team that they were considering for a 4 seed, that tells us they were 20th overall at best before suffering their worst loss of the season. So I dropped them to a 7 seed.
I'm not convinced they're making the tournament. Do I think they will make the tournament? Yes. Am I convinced they're going to? No. I do not think they are a lock at all.
No, I don't either.
And I don't think they're close to locking into the field. So BYU, probably going to be in the tournament, but if there is ever that team that we look back and say, who had the highest net to ever not make the field, could absolutely be BYU unless they start winning some basketball games.
I moved them from don't F it up to should be in range, and starting to think about moving them towards on the bubble if they lose one more. Wisconsin lost again, lost to Iowa, who is now kind of sneaking into the conversation. Wisconsin, they were 13-2 at the start of February. Now they've lost 6 out of 7, something like that. It's like they're doing everything they possibly can to not make the tournament. They have fallen apart so fast, and they were still 16th in the reveal, as was the Trae Young Oklahoma team in whatever year that was, 2017, 18.
2016.
And then they ended up as a 10 seed. I think
it was 2018.
Yeah, 2017, 18.
Yeah.
And they were 16 in the reveal, ended up at 40 overall. I don't remember how deep into the season that reveal was. It kind of changes based on when the Super Bowl is, but I could see them continuing to fall. I know they still play Purdue again. I don't know what their full schedule is, but they can't seem to beat anybody lately. Anybody else?
There's a team that's interesting to talk about. What do you think about Texas A&M?
That's a tough one. I had them as a 7 seed a week ago, and now I think I dropped them to 40, 41. So they're either my bottom 10 or top 11. They've really, that loss to Vanderbilt was awful. Awful.
I have them 40th, and I was almost surprised to look at do you know what their quad 1 record is right now?
2-7 or something?
Texas A&M,
No.
6-5. What? Yeah. I don't know what happened. I need to look back into that. I actually looked at it and I was like, where did they gain these extra Q1 wins?
Are they 2-3 against quad 3 or something? There's one of the quadrants is just standing out really weirdly. But you are right.
So I think
6 and 5 is why I couldn't drop them any further.
But I couldn't drop them any further.
Yeah.
And I got to that point. I was like, I want them to be in worse shape than this, but no 6-5 Q1 team is missing the field. They could be like that Iowa State team from 2022. That gets put into an 11 line, but you're not even going to the first 4 if you're piling up Q1 wins like that.
Yeah.
You're going to be in the field. It's just a seeding issue at that point.
Probably.
But I don't know. We'll have to see how do all of those stay Q1. That could be an issue for Texas A&M. They're a team that I'm surprised that they were that comfortably into my field.
Yeah. Then 2 other ones, very damaging losses. Indiana State, Samford. Samford's probably dead at this point, sadly. We were just starting to talk them up as a team that's 22-1 outside of quad 1, and then they lose to Mercer, which was 12-15 going in. Very bad loss. They're done. Indiana State, losing to Southern Illinois wasn't actually that bad. That was a quad 2 game. It was the previous home loss to Illinois State that's in quad 4. You can't do that when you're 1-3 against quad 1. I think they're still if they win out and lose to Drake in the Arch Madness Championship, I think they still have a chance, but they are no longer on my 11 line even.
I think they're in really, really bad shape.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say it is they don't get Bradley in the Missouri Valley tournament. Based on the way the Missouri Valley does the seeding, the 1 seed goes to whoever has the higher net, which is going to be Indiana State if they tie with Drake. The problem with
I did not know Missouri Valley did that.
The problem with that is Indiana State and Drake, if they're tied and they break it up based on that, Indiana State will not get that potential Q2 opportunity.
They'll play Southern Illinois again or something.
They will not get the Q2 opportunity.
Yeah.
And so they need that. They actually need another chance to pick up a quality win. If there's a Missouri Valley team that I think is still in decent tournament shape, it's actually Drake at this point. Because they get that opportunity to go up against Bradley and pick up that win.
I still have Indiana State is still my projected champion, so they are in as I think it's a 12 seed, but Drake is my second team out. Like I think that they have the better resume at this point. Let's do our last four in, first four out, and then we'll wrap up for the night. What do you have right now as who's going to Dayton?
Well, I can tell you what I had entering the evening. I had Nevada, or not Nevada.
Do we have to check the Utah score?
I'm looking over here. I had Providence, Cincinnati, and then I had Ole Miss and Nebraska.
Came back in 1 by 1.
Nebraska. Okay, Utah just 1 by 1. So that actually does kind of factor into what I'm thinking here. So I saw Nebraska as my last team in, and then I saw what Seton Hall did at St. John's, and Seton Hall is going to move into my field because of that. So Nebraska is my first team out now.
Wow.
And Utah moves up my list to be the second team out of the tournament, followed by Drake. And originally I had St. John's on that list. St. John's can't be there anymore. So honestly, I just don't feel like there's another team that's that close to me. I will say Wake Forest just because they're kind of perennial. For sure. Yeah, they're in that area.
I have Villanova is my fourth team out. It's just like, fine. I have to put somebody here. I still have Nebraska in one spot ahead of Dayton. They're my fifth to last team in. I think it is interesting to compare BYU and Nebraska. If you take out the net and the predictives, very similar resumes. 3 great home wins, nothing doing away from home, terrible non-conference schedule, but the net and the predictives is why they're so far apart. But I think Nebraska has enough quality wins that they're going to get in. Mississippi State, all of a sudden you look back at what they did in November, those wins over Washington State and Northwestern on a neutral court, they have aged beautifully. I think they are now a little bit more comfortably in. They're my fourth to last in. Providence, Gonzaga, and then Ole Miss is my last team in. I don't want Ole Miss in. I don't think they deserve it, but they're like 20th in the resume metrics, and I don't think any team below 30th in KPI SOR has ever been left out. Seton Hall, even with that win, I still have them as my first team out. I might scrub them ahead of Ole Miss, even though I just said that about the resume metrics. Drake second out. Cincinnati is my third team out. Where do you have Cincinnati these days?
They're my third team in the field.
Okay.
And the reason why is they've gotten some big road victories in the Big 12.
Yeah.
Still not great 3-6 against Quad 1, but actually some really pretty decent Big 12 road wins.
Yeah. Utah, even with this win over UCLA, they're still my fourth team out. I hate that they were 6-8 in the Pac-12 before. Still sub 500 Pac-12, which is a terrible conference this year. Conference record doesn't matter, but how is this team still in the mix? And then Villanova's there. Villanova's 8-8 against quads 1 and 2. They have to at least be mentioned, but they also have 11 losses and probably need to win at Connecticut this week in order to really get into the mix again.
Villanova, I think, is an interesting team because I don't have them immediately out of the field, but they're one win away from getting right in there. It's just that I cannot stand their overall record at this point, but they just all it takes is one win to make it palatable.
Yeah, that's where Xavier was for a while, and now they're back to 13 and 12 overall. So see you Musketeers. But anyway, we'll be back on Thursday with probably a whole bunch more crazy shit that happened. But we'll see you soon.